Roll call, please, Mrs. Clark.
Trustee Bertelson? Here. Trustee Black?
Here.
Trustee D?
Here.
Trustee Lucine?
Here.
Trustee Moran?
Here.
Trustee Neal?
Here.
Trustee Reinhardt?
Excused.
Trustee Wilson?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the July 29th Bozeman School District School Board Retreat Meeting. Thank you for joining us. We have a full agenda of board retreat discussion items, but before we begin, we have district business to take care of. May I please have a motion for consent agenda?
I move that we vote yes on the consent agenda 3.1 and support these agenda items, 3.1 and 3.4.
Second.
Motion made by Trustee Wilson, seconded by Trustee Black. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Up next, action item 4.1.1, consider approval of first student contract addendum request.
Good morning, trustees. I'll start this item and get us kicked off. We are here considering a request for a contract amendment from First Student. As you know, we're in the second year of a 5-year contract with them for home to school and field trip and extracurricular travel. We have come to a point where we believe a significant pay increase is needed to recruit and retain drivers in the area. The budget that Lacey's going to present here in a little while does not include any of the increases that are being contemplated here today, but we've included on the, Mike, if you could roll down just a little bit here. These are the proposed contract increases on the per route rates, but down at the bottom is the cost impact that we're considering. The transportation fund estimated first year impact is $261,000. Extracurriculars and field trips is $8,000 for a total of about just short of $270,000. And the 4-year total contract increase is $1.88 million over the life of the contract. Just a reminder that home to school transportation is funded through our transportation fund, and that is primarily funded through a permissive levy on our taxpayers. So as you're considering this increase, realize we are levying taxes at the same point in time that we're agreeing to this or considering it moving forward. Here in the audience, we've got Mike Hamill, Area General Manager for First Student. Greg Newman is the Regional Vice President. I think I have those right. For First Student to tell you a little bit more about the proposal and the reason for the request and their history of what brought us here. Gents, if you wouldn't mind coming up here to the table. The button with the little face on it is the microphone. So if whenever you're ready, if you want to start that up, and we'll get started.
Can you hear me? Hey, so good morning, Chair Neal and trustees, superintendent. Thank you for letting us come. Once again, my name is Mike Hamill. I'm the Area General Manager for First Student. I oversee all of our Montana, Washington, and Idaho locations. And then Greg Newman.
Hi, my name is Greg Newman. I'm Regional Vice President over Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Montana, and Idaho.
So give you a quick history and kind of how we got here today and what we're asking. Then I'm sure you'll have questions. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So Bozeman is very interesting for our organization. It's a very unique. We found it to be very unique for our organization. Since I've been in Montana, it's been on and off. Driver staffing has always been a challenge. Sometimes it looks like we get close and then it goes back away and we got to find ourselves searching again. When we went into the RFP this past year, we took another stab saying, hey, we did a lot of research, and this is what we think it's going to take to fix the problem. We got creative. We did a pretty substantial increase, and we incorporated a $2,400 bonus that's an annual bonus for our drivers. We recruited. We brought in a dedicated recruiter. We haven't had a dedicated recruiter in Bozeman. We brought in a dedicated recruiter, and we increased our corporate support by 300%. Even with the efforts we did, we still found ourselves this year in a huge shortfall for drivers. You have probably not heard about any issues because you haven't had issues with transportation because we brought in out-of-town drivers. And that's why we're here today. Our belief is we're not going to provide bad service to our customer. So to cover all those routes, we had to bring in about a third of what we needed to have were out-of-town drivers. Those out-of-town drivers are very costly. This year, just in 1 year, the first year of the 5-year contract, we went backwards by $1.3 million just because of out-of-town drivers. But that did not result in a loss of instructional time for the students. And we've worked for other contractors, we've worked for other companies, we're not gonna say any names, but our strategy is different from others, where we'd rather just give good service, and if the time comes, we do this. It's hard, this is hard for us to do this. But we come here and we say, hey, we need to support as much partnership with the district to fix this problem. Obviously, we don't wanna go into year 2 looking at another $1.3 million deficit. What we're asking for here today has nothing to do with the $1.3 million. We're not asking for 1 penny of that. That's gone. It's already been spent. We're not asking for that. We're asking for solutions to fix the problem. How do you fix the problem? We did a ton of research. So when we do RFPs and we go into a regular study, we use wage analysis. We hire external companies to set the wages. What should you hire a dispatcher for? What should you hire a manager for? What should you hire a bus monitor for? Same thing for the drivers. What we found out is by hiring multiple external agencies, as well as reaching out to our talent acquisition team or compensation team, is Bozeman is moving faster than analytics support. We found out that Bozeman is 34 to 36% higher than a national average for cost of living. That's pretty huge, and you're only growing. We looked and saw that there's shortages everywhere. If you go on Indeed and just type in driver for jobs around Bozeman, you're going to have pages and pages and pages of advertisements. You'll see wages with those. Those aren't there because it's a surplus. At those wages and those job openings, they're there for a reason because they can't hire people. So we're competing with all of that. So we did a pretty extensive analysis to say, where do we need to be and how can we get in front of this curve to where we don't have to do this again? And we're just trying to fix the problem, and that's why we're here today. So anything? So with the proposal, it's a really substantial wage increase. We do believe this will fix the problem. We're trying to get out in front of it with all the new analytics, all the new studies, and then getting, not trying to be too conservative, trying to be aggressive. We're trying to have local drivers here. We do not want to bring in out-of-town drivers. We do believe we're going to have to bring in some out-of-town drivers just for the timing at the beginning of this year, and we're prepared to do that. Once again, the most important thing for us to give you good service. We don't want to have any student lose instructional time, but we're going into year 2 of a 5-year contract. We can't see another 1.3 million, another 1.3 million going backwards. We got to try to dig out that hole, and we don't know that we're going to be able to do it because that money's gone. So that is why we're here, and that's what we're asking for support for. Any questions for me?
Gary?
Yeah, thank you very much for your information, and makes sense to me, the data that you have. I think from our taxpayer perspective, the expectation will probably be that they want to see the problem fixed, which means you bring in drivers, local drivers under this pay scale that will stay on and have consistent service. So I'm just curious, how confident are you that that will happen? And if it does not happen, then what's the next step?
So you notice we're sitting here in July of 2024 and not August of 2023. We did a lot of studying. We did a lot of research. We knew that I can count on one hand how many times I've had to do this in 18 years. This is not a common thing that I've had to be a part of to come to a district and say, hey, we need help. So we took a lot of time to figure out, we said, there's a problem. So normally when we get wage support, it used to be if we were 75% of whatever the data told us, we were going to be fine. We'd probably have surplus. After COVID, it kind of shifted towards 90%. We were well over 100% when we bid this contract. We tried to get ahead of it. Bozeman's just moving too fast. So we brought in the experts and said, we can't come back to them twice. We have to find a solution that we think is going to fix the problem. And the substantial increase that we're doing, we believe is going to fix the problem. Now, and we try to be fiscally responsible whenever we bid something. We're part of it. We consider ourselves part of the community, so we try to be fiscally responsible and accountable. If I was to set the CBA, which is a collective bargaining agreement for the union, if I was to set that at $90 an hour, we're not going to have a problem, but the taxpayers have to pay for that. So we have to be realistic and say, what do we think is going to happen? So when we did the increase and we said we're well over 100% of what our wage analysis says, and we did a $2,400 annual bonus that's tied to absenteeism, when we were going to offer that, we felt confident. Everybody in our room felt confident. And then normally within 3 months, you'll see movement. And we did not see the movement that we saw. When we did, as part of extensions, increases in Billings and Helena, within 3 months, we had a surplus of drivers. We did not have that in Bozeman. So we got scared, we got nervous, we had talks with Mr. Waterman, and we said, hey, this is going to be a challenge. We feel very confident. You know, I'll stop short of giving a guarantee because I just don't give guarantees. I'm not going to overpromise something. I just can't give a guarantee to something I can't fully control. But I wouldn't be presenting something to you today, and it wouldn't have taken as long as it did to get the data. We brought in multiple resources, and we said, hey, factor in this. Because if you look at wages on paper, everybody gets shocked by a wage on paper, but you have to understand what a driver gets paid versus what a teacher gets paid and what a full-time person gets paid. If you look at that, a driver's only getting about 22 hours a week, 36 weeks a year. So if you was to take $1 and times it out, you may say, well, this dollar's $86,000. Then you equate it to what a driver makes and it drops down to $31,000. So the paper shock is way different than what a driver actually makes. So they have to rely on unemployment. So we took all of that into consideration and we compared ourselves to full-time jobs. That's what we're competing for in Bozeman. I don't have to compete this hard in any place else. Obviously not, because we're bringing in out-of-town drivers into Bozeman. So we're trying to fix a problem. That was what was tasked with us from Mr. Waterman and the group. We want local drivers in Bozeman. I assure you, First Students wants local drivers in Bozeman. We don't want to have to bring in out-of-town drivers. But we haven't stopped because service was more important to cost. And I think we have proven that. We just got to say, hey, we're here for another 5 years and we want to be here longer. So do we feel confident? Yeah, I wouldn't be presenting to you if I didn't feel confident. And we took probably 5 or 6 different stabs at this to say, hey, this is where we feel. Once the numbers started coming out the same, then we said it's ready to present.
Just the second question was if you don't accomplish attracting enough local drivers for this, then what's the next step?
You can if you want.
So we have everybody in our company kind of focused in on Bozeman, and we have shifted a lot of resources to try to fix the problem. There is no guarantee, but we do feel confident based on our analytics and the work that's being put in and the conversations that we've had that we are going to fix the problem. But as you've seen this last year, even though we didn't have enough drivers, we shifted resources to make sure we gave you great service. That's what our brand's about. That's what our company's about. We've been on calls with our president, our COO, talking through the different options. We will fix it. It may take us a little bit more time, but hopefully with this increase, we'll fix it rather quickly. But if we have to bring in outside drivers, we'll continue to do so.
Just one more question. How does this salary compare with area salaries?
Bozeman, the starting wage for drivers, I believe, will be the highest in our whole company. That's the impact. So when we had outside companies help us, they said, Bozeman's your only US site you have that you're going through this problem. We have one in Canada and one in the US. You guys, you're the winner. So,
Leona?
Yeah, thank you for the information. I can understand what the pickle is, because we talk about some of those same issues of what the cost of the living wages and here and all that. But I was just curious, what's the ratio of like your full-time drivers versus you have a substitute pool? We have a substitute pool as well, right? I was just curious what the ratio is.
so normally, unless the contract calls differently, it's 10%. So if you have 40 routes, you'd have 40 spare drivers.
And so part of that problem is like we don't have a pool of substitute drivers either, like.
No, you do, but they're part of our out of town. So when we bring things in, we account for it to be contractually compliant. The challenge is we're missing about a third of our drivers that we should have. That's the challenge.
Sandy?
I thank you for everything you've done for getting our students to school safely. That's at the top of our list, is keeping our kids safe. You can see, while I support this, I look at what we're paying our teachers, I look at what we're paying our staff, and the increases that we're not able to give them in the same situation that your drivers are in, and that's the conflict that I have. But I do support this because I understand what's going on. I think I'd like to hear where you think these people are going to come from for these wages. Like, where will you be recruiting, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Part of our analysis was when most companies try to hire, they're hiring within the same industry. We have to pull from outside our industry. So it's not making sense for us to go to the next school district next door and we're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're just
Right.
moving, because so the new strategy is we got to attract people outside our industry, and that's why the wages need to be what they are. But I would go back to say, what you see on paper is different. Once you do the math, it does equate to different dollars. And there is a shock value to some people. Our staff goes through the same things. When we give driver increases, they'll say, whoa, a driver's going to get that. And we'll say, do the math. Your pay rate is 52, weeks a year at 40 hours a week. A driver's not. They're going to be between 20 to 22 at 36 weeks a year. Then they have to rely on unemployment or go get another job. So when you do the math on paper and get past the sticker shock, then people will say, it's not what we thought it was.
Well, I understand that, but a lot of people aren't going to understand that, right? And so, so outside of the industry, what does that mean?
Retail. That's our biggest push, where we've seen other success in Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, and some of the bigger markets. We're trying to attract the people from the retail market, and Bozeman has a very high, that's one of your top 3 job providers is retail. Very heavy here, so all the folks that we hired to tell us that that's where you're probably going to see more people come over is from the retail side.
And also, my other question is, will you still have the bonus or whatever that is? And will they be responsible for getting their CDL, or will you guys help
So-
them do that?
So I'm going to answer it 2 ways, not fully understanding your question. So the current bonus I said, and we haven't talked with our union yet, that's why some stuff wasn't put in writing.
Okay.
So when we leave here, hopefully, we have great news. We love you guys. And we're going to have to talk to the union, because we're going to eliminate that $2,400 bonus, because it's going to roll up into just one singular wage, which is still a substantial increase to the drivers. What we're not talking about is our other staff. We're not presenting that to you because that's on us. The drivers is the most important piece. So anything else that we've talked about, whether it's been new trip experiences, that was a new thing for us where, we've saw some loss in money in trips. All that is internal. That's part of doing business. But when you get to a point of something this major, that's when we say, hey, we need help with this piece. All the other outliers, that's part of, we're not bringing that to you because that's for us to fix. But the bonus would go away, what we're offering. But sign-on bonuses, if there's a need, yes, referral bonuses for current employees, and sign-on bonuses, we'll still offer those. We typically offer those until we hit a certain staffing level.
Okay, awesome. And, I'm sorry, one more
Yeah.
question? So, back to Gary, trustee Lucine's question, will you continue to look for the what-ifs, or what are we going to do if, going forward?
Yes.
And,
So because of Bozeman, we created a new wage analysis program. So now all of our locations have benefited from Bozeman because now the wage analysis is being fed out 4 times a year. And it's, whether you want it or not, it's saying, hey, you need to look at your wages. You need to see if part of it is cost of living analysis, where I said y'all's have been between 34 and 36%, which is really high. That's above the national average. I think your housing market's 90-something% higher than the national average, which blew me away when I read that. I can't afford to live here. And if you sold your houses, I would be shocked at what you probably could have to rebuy them for if I was imagining. So yes, we're turning into studies 4 times a year where we review it, whether it's needed or not. We just don't want to get shocked by something.
right,
Yep.
thank you, thank you.
I just want to speak real quick to trustee Wilson's question. And I think the board should understand that the target market is not to recruit drivers from other districts to rob Peter to pay Paul. That being said, if the Bozeman School District is paying 40% more than the next door neighboring district to do the same job, I would imagine that'll pique some drivers' interest, and there could be some interest from drivers who are working somewhere else, which you would have to think would cause those districts to have to raise their rates, commensurate to what we're doing. So unintended consequence perhaps, but we're not gonna say no. If you're driving bus somewhere else, you can't come work here. So I think unintended consequence, but definitely a possibility to
Yeah.
keep in mind.
And I think to follow up with that, it goes back to, will that happen? Yeah, that's probably going to happen. But what you're going to see is you're going to attract, more districts are going to benefit because you'll attract more people from other industries. No different than when COVID came. If you remember COVID came, the whole reason CDL increases raised was you couldn't go eat anywhere because they were short on supplies. You were short on supplies because 18-wheelers couldn't afford to pay CDL drivers. That's how the CDL wage increases started. And then it was local delivery drivers. Bus drivers were at the end of the trough. We were the last ones to go through the increase cycle. And how we got around it was we had to do wage increases, and we attracted people from the industry because the new thing was to work from home. We saw all these work from home jobs, so we had to attract people from other industries. And then we do have a more tenured group of employees, so they got scared at COVID, and we saw some people say, my health's more important. So we started at that point saying we have to go outside the industry. We can't just focus on the same group of people. This is going to help us, knowing that we have to focus on this is going to help us actually attract those people in. And the second part of the most important thing of recruiting is retention. If you were to ask me a question, and maybe one of you are, hey, what if we just reduce routes? All you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on it because attrition is outpacing growth. So if we're still losing drivers, within a year, you're going to be in the same boat you're in, but now you're doing it with less routes. So maybe we've sacrificed something we're providing to a student for a 6-month fix. So we truly have to get to the root of this, and fix the problem. When we said we did a huge study on this, we did. We looked at everything because we did look at, well, how can we reduce services? But then if it's impacting the students, we backed off and said, we don't want to suggest that. And then just for a temporary fix. So.
Gary?
Yeah, thank you for all your information. In reading the contract or the addendum is, just to clarify, this addendum applies to the full term of the current contract, correct?
The addendum applies to the current contract?
The full,
Your full term?
full term of this contract.
Yes, sir.
Remaining term, full remaining
Full
term.
remaining term of this contract, yeah. So I'm just thinking of like the next steps. And this is a possible next step that you could come back to us with another addendum to increase wages. And kind of related to that is, when you did your studies and your analytics on this, did you find other issues that we're facing in this area besides pay that was affecting driver?
So we did a study on benefits because everybody, that's the immediate knee-jerk reaction to say, hey, if you offer more benefits, you'll hire more people. In Portland, Oregon, we have a really robust benefit plan. A first-year employee will get employee-only, company-sponsored 65%. Year 2 is 75, year 3 is 85, year 4 is 95, and year 5 is 100%. That means a company by year 5 is paying 100% of single coverage for our employee. People didn't take it till it got to 100%. Even when it was 95%, maybe had a handful of people take it. We did a study in Gresham, Oregon, when I had Oregon, and the district said the same thing. Well, maybe it's benefits. What we found out, what 18 years have taught me and out of this industry is drivers look at the hourly wage. That's what's important to them. We had to sell the bonus. I had to have 2 in-person meetings with our employees just to explain a bonus because they were like, they couldn't see it as an hourly wage because that's how drivers tend to take it as, I want to see it as an hourly wage. So when we put out pulse checks of benefits, would this help? It's just everything has told us that while unions and other places say they want it, the employees don't take it. So it's just wasted money. Scary thing with benefits too is you have to predict the take rate. I don't like putting stuff in our contracts where I have to estimate a cost to you, not knowing what the take rate's going to be. Then you end up paying more for what you really need. So everything that's pointed to us and all of the analytics and studies that came back to us told us you need to put it into the wages. And we did. We actually looked at trying a new model here in Bozeman of saying, do we offer 2 choices? One, we were concerned about the legality of it. And 2, everything came back to saying you need to put it in the wages. That's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. Yep.
Sandy?
I was just curious why it was structured the way it is, $269,000 increase for next year, and then the increases after that.
So if you look at what it was a 14.3% increase. Our contract already had 4% in each of the outer years. Montana law says you can't go above 12% increase unless you put out for a bid. So the first year we capped at 12, and then the rollover hit the second year. So it was an 8% additional for year 2, which is this upcoming school year, and then 6.3 for year 3, and then it's the normal 4s. So because of Montana law is that's why we structured it that way.
Thank you. I just have to say, I appreciate you've come in with answers to my questions before I even asked them. So thank you very much
Yeah,
for that.
this was we don't jump. Like I said, I've been doing this a very long time. I do not like sitting in this chair. It does not make me feel comfortable. I do not like being put in this position or having to be in this position. So if we have to do it, we just wanted to make sure we did our homework and did as much stuff and then go back and do it 5 times over again before we come talk to you.
Casey?
You mentioned that this would be subject to collective bargaining agreement and some negotiations. What assurances do we have that the increases would actually manifest as driver increases?
100%. Not one penny of this comes back to the company. Not one penny. Anything else that we've done is internal. You haven't heard from it because it doesn't pertain to you because it's not a cost for you. None of this comes back to the company. This is 100%. That's why we were very transparent with everything we provided. Company's not trying to make a penny off this.
Thank you.
Mike, can you scroll up to that other table up there? Just a point of reference. So the collective bargaining or the addendum talks about increasing driver wages by $11.30 per hour. If you figure 2 hours per route, you're at the $22.50 or so increase, and that's not including costs of Social Security, Medicare, all the extra employer costs on top of that. But if you compare the per route rate for regular ed, just for example, in 24-25, we were scheduled to pay $199.69 on the far left, second row down. Do you see that? And then this increase is bringing it to $215.05. So the increase is like $16 a route. That doesn't cover the full $22+ per hour increase that they're contemplating negotiating with their union. So just some math in association with that this won't get them back to break even for the first year at least.
That's fair. Yeah, like I said, that 1.3 million, that's gone. We're not asking for a penny of it. We're not trying to recoup a penny of it from you. We understand that. We're just trying to fix it for the remaining 4 years.
The other thing the board should know is when we go out to bid, we're on a 5-year contract. So it was a year and a half ago that we were out to bid for this contract. If another company were to come in and replace First Student, we had two other bidders on top of that. If we were to award the bid to someone else, the drivers and the staff in the district here would remain the same. It's not like another company would come in and bring in a whole fleet of 40 new drivers for our staff. The folks that live here, reside here, drive our buses would be the same. It would be the management team that would be changing at that level in time. So as part of the RFP, First Student was kind enough to give their collective bargaining agreement with their drivers union to all the other bidders, so they knew what costs they would have to buy in if they wanted to do that. So this is an increase. They could have done this certainly a year and a half ago, but then we would have been absorbing the costs and not necessarily knowing if that wage increase was necessary to staff the route. So it's not a comfortable situation, I don't think, for us, certainly not for them. But it's kind of the lesser of the evils when you think about committing money when you might not necessarily need to do so. This gives us a point of reference to say what we're doing before isn't working. If a new contractor were to come in, they'd have to pay the drivers the same amount that First Student's proposing. So it again, uncomfortable, but maybe the lesser of the evils.
Gary?
Just in the addendum on the second page, it has, the information on there seems to relate to propane fuel and diesel. So how is that involved in this?
Nothing's changing. The only thing for the addendum that's changing would be the cost for the wage increase.
We'll continue to run propane.
Yeah, when we bid the contract out again a year and a half ago, we asked for prices on propane because that's what we were currently running. Diesel is kind of the industry standard on electric buses. So we asked for all three of this. This is just a duplication of the bid page that came out of the RFP again a year and a half ago with the rate changes. The 23, 24 rates are the rates that, that years in the past. So those are the same rates that we had. And then the new routes or the proposed rates, that's how we actually end up paying them for propane buses again.
Liana?
This question is more for Mike. Where it says that there's a possible 1.13 mils impact, does that mean that if we vote on this now, that we're already looking at, that's what we're going to do next?
Yep, and Lacey will speak a
Election
little
season.
bit more to taxes here in just a little while. The 1.3 mil increase is based on the $261,000 increase along with reserves and those other types of things that go on behind the scenes in the transportation fund. Don't hang your hat on that number. That's a preliminary estimate based on last year's taxable value. If this year's taxable value increases like it historically has, even though it's a non-reappraisal year, you see construction happening, those types of things build up our tax base, that would bring those mills down. So don't hang your hat on that number. Realize that that all these taxes in the home to school column right there are funded by property taxes, and it is a tax increase. We'll figure out the exact mill impact here in a couple of weeks when we know the taxable value. Did I answer your question?
I would just comment, thank you for you're making multiple trips to Bozeman and presenting this multiple times, and I appreciate it. When I was notified that you were looking to meet with Vice Chair Black and myself and Superintendent Bertram and Mr. Waterman, and when I was told why, my initial reaction was we were fresh off the heels of a 50 levy presentation to our community. We go through painstaking measures to present information to our community in the hope that they'll support our levies every year. And it absolutely dominates all of our administration in this building's time and energy and efforts for a 3 or 4, 5 month period every single winter and spring. And as a board, we have the power to permissively levy this. And so in my mind, the thought of we go through that painstaking measure to ask our community for levy support. Our community supports us. That delta gets smaller every year, and now we have the decision on the table to vote on a permissive levy that almost is as large as what we go through that process for a portion of our year to our community. So I was not feeling really good about it when I sat through that meeting with you gentlemen and Vice Chair Black, Mike, and Casey. I guess Casey was not there, but after becoming educated from the information that you presented to us, in my mind, I don't know that if we're making hard decisions, keeping our kids in the middle of the room, and in this case, we want to provide full services to our kids. We want to get them to school safely. And being in business and being from here and understanding what is Bozeman problems and Bozeman challenges, I came out of that meeting educated and clear in my mind on where we are with this and what you're presenting and the why behind it. So I just want you and trustees to know that although hesitant and some question mark in my mind about how our community may respond to this, I don't see any other direction that we can go. And I think we're going to have to do a good job of communicating to our community the why behind this and what this is about, because our community is educated. They're educated voters. They're engaged stakeholders, and they pay attention to what we do. So I appreciate the information and appreciate you bringing this to us.
Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Greg said. I'm curious, for this 24-25 year, this might be Mike or Lacey, what is the dollar amount a taxpayer will pay based on this increase, based on the information you have today?
It was 1.13 mils, yeah,
1.31.
$1.53 per year per $100,000 home.
$1.53 per year for
Per $100,000
$100,000.
worth of home value.
Thank you.
Again, based on last year's taxable value, so that's preliminary.
Any further trustee questions?
Yeah, thank you for all the information. We appreciate the transparency and understanding where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you for letting us be here.
Gary?
Okay, I would move the trustees approve the superintendent's recommendation for the first student contract addendum request as presented.
Second?
Motion made by trustee Lucine, seconded by trustee Wilson. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
We
for your time.
appreciate it.
Do I hit the button?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Thank you.
We like you guys, but we were told we didn't have to stay, so
You don't have to stay. We're going to take a 5-minute pause. I hate that number. It's 9:10. I have a superstition about that. We'll reconvene at 9:15.
So, Greg, we bringing out the guitar next and singing Kumbaya?
Because it's a retreat. Yeah.
Did Melissa tell you what I said to her?
No.
That's what she told me happens.
She texted me, she's like, you should show him the text. She's like, just what happens at the retreat? And I was like, well, we get in touch with our feelings and we get a guitar out, we sing Kumbaya.
I've always thought the word retreat is misleading.
It is.
Yeah. We should actually think about that because honestly, when I was a brand new trustee, I used to work through that in my own mind. Like, school board retreat, what's that about?
I thought our first one, I was like, boy, what are we gonna, I was like open to whatever idea was
Right.
gonna happen. It was like, oh, it's not that.
Yeah. That would involve a lot of rabbit holes.
Somewhere before 2010. I sold it to Andy Pontius.
Was that paint or is that like a wrap type
It's
stuff?
like a wrap, vinyl wrap.
How does it stick? Just with some adhesive?
Yeah, they brought in some heat guns and they were worried about it sticking because it's a textured wall.
Yeah. Same with those then? Same story?
Yeah. And then if you look at the other TV, they show up in that video. So
Oh.
what we're presenting to the community about that.
That's cool.
I mean, it's like a
Who did it?
Fast signs out in, they're in Love Lane,
Oh, okay.
and they were fast. Like, I called her on like a Monday and they were here the next Monday putting it up.
Cool. Van Buren's dressed like a professional golfer. Actually, professional golfers wear pants.
Yeah.
yeah.
We're missing somebody right here? No.
Empty spot.
Welcome back. Thank you. Up next, item 5.3, preliminary budget discussion. Maybe, did I jump the gun on Lacey? Oh, no. Okay. Oh, you're
Ready?
going to sit right there and present.
Yeah, that's where I
Great.
can plug in, yeah.
Okay.
All right, good morning, trustees. This, as you know, is our annual preliminary budget discussion regarding what our projections look like for the current fiscal year that we're in that started July 1st. The timing's always a little weird because we have to close out our books before we can really finalize our budget. We have to receive taxable value. There's a number of different components that get into setting a budget, so we're always a tiny bit delayed. But we wanted to just walk through some really preliminary numbers for now. What I would really ask during this presentation is that this is a conversation. I have some important information to show you, but if you guys have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to stop me as we go through this so that we can make sure you're understanding everything that goes into creating a budget, as well as what the expectations are for the final budget meeting that'll take place in August. So just as we get started, I wanted to start this off with just a little bit of a year in review. Some of the major things that have gone into changes for this upcoming year's budget. The first and biggest one is the enrollment count and projections. So every October is our initial enrollment count, and that is the enrollment count that we use to set the projections for the coming years. As you guys know, our K-8 district has stayed pretty stagnant, and that is creating little growth within the general fund allocations for the K-8 district. Our K-5 elementaries saw a decrease of 2 students, and our 6-8 saw a decrease of 7 students for overall 9 student decrease in enrollment in October. And once again, this year's kindergarten class is the lowest enrollment since the kindergarten class since 2010. So while we're seeing the decreases especially on the front end of those students that are going to go hopefully all the way K-12 in our schools, and that's going to affect future numbers. High school, on the other hand, had the 13th consecutive year of an increase. This year we had 113 new students. And when we break down the general fund a little bit later, you guys are going to see how that's impacted what we are able to levy in general fund high school versus elementary. Another component of this year was our levy requests. So this year, the only 2 items on the ballot, as you guys know, were the general fund. We had a levy request of $250,000 in the elementary and $430,000 in the high school. These were based on A, inflation, which is approved by the legislative sessions every other year. This year it was a 3% inflation rate. For the high school, the $430,000 came from the increase in enrollment as well as inflation. The next item that we went through this last year was the charter school approval. We were able to get both of our charter schools approved by the Board of Public Ed. Box is on hold for the year, and we'll reevaluate what that means for the future. But then we all know that the Bridger Charter Academy is going to be considered a true charter academy. And the biggest difference here is we're going to receive basic entitlement funding for Bridger. And that's approximately $350,000 a year. So that's a big bump to our general fund allocations. High school master schedule. A lot of you have been involved in a lot of the conversations surrounding the master schedule and what that means this year for the high school. With the high school master schedule, when we did our initial budget committee review to reduce $4.1 million from the general fund, one of the big items was a high school FTE reduction. Because of the increase in enrollment, that's just not something that we can handle and still give quality education to students. So there will be no FTE reduction, even with the change to the master schedule. However, with the change to the master schedule, the block scheduling did save us FTE. If we had not changed to it, we would probably have to increase, the efficiencies were equal to about five total FTE, even with the continued growth. So we saved 5 FTE by going to the block schedule. We did end up having to increase additional FTE this year with the increase in enrollment. Then the next item that was big this year was the Grow Your Own Teacher. Obviously, we want to recruit and retain quality staff. This was a really forward-thinking way of trying to get quality staff into the classrooms. We budgeted $25,000, and that's coming out of our adult education fund. And then the final thing is the early literacy. So this took up a good portion of Casey's time, as well as a lot of different schools. Megan Roth had a huge part in this. This is very exciting because not only will it bring early literacy to our little youngest students, but also it gives us additional A and B. So we have kids going through the Summer Jumpstart program right now. We're getting a quarter A and B for those students. And then with the addition of the Bozeman Reads classrooms, we'll have full A and B for each of those students that participates in that. Any question about what our years look like? You guys have all lived it. So with that being said, we aren't just setting the budget as of July 1. It's been a work in progress for well over a year. This is just a brief timeline showing what some of the decisions that have been made that play into the budget, going all the way back to April 2023 and our negotiations. This fall we had charter school application, we discussed our enrollment numbers, advanced opportunities grants were approved. February we rolled into our preliminary budget discussion. We called for our general fund election. We had the Grow Your Own Teacher proposal come to the table. So as we move through the year, you can see all of the things that you guys have taken into consideration in a thoughtful manner to help build what we're going to present today. Is there any questions about the timeline or anything you see up there that you might have questions about? So with that being said, the three items that I really want to go through today are A, our budgeted funds. We have quite a few of them. B, our general fund, which is our largest of the budgeted funds, and then what our tax outlook looks like for the remainder or for the year. Here's a slide that you guys have seen year over year. It's just a budget overview comparison so that you can see fiscal year 24 versus fiscal year 25. The numbers that are in yellow are all subject to change as we finalize numbers. I want to draw your attention specifically to transportation. Like Mike said a couple times in his presentation, we did not take into consideration the new first student numbers, so that budget allocation amount will increase. So you'll see that on the final budget presentation. But some of these other items as we move through, general fund is obviously our biggest fund. Debt service is remaining neutral. We did some refinancing of some of the bonds in 2022 that helped us kind of level off what the tax impact would look like for our debt service. Building reserve is a few different components. We have our capital projects, our major maintenance, we have our safety levy, all held within the building reserve. Retirement is a levy that goes through the county, and that is for all of our PERS and TRS retirement funds. Transportation, technology, you'll see a slight decrease. The reason for the decrease is in our elementary, voters have approved us to levy 3 mills. However, the 3 mills is contingent on what that is being spent on. For all levies passed prior to 2013, there's stricter rules surrounding what we can use that money for. And so this previous year, fiscal year 24, we were able to levy 2 out of the 3 mills, and it's looking like it's going to be very similar for this upcoming year. So we're not going to be able to levy everything that the voters have actually approved. Adult education will go into a little bit more detail. Bus depreciation is a budgeted fund that we don't use on a continual basis. The only change there is going to be interest earned. Tuition fund is a couple different areas. A lot of that comes into funding to pay for special education costs. And then our flexibility fund, you'll see, is the biggest percent change, 601% increase for this upcoming year, and that's because of the Advanced Opportunities Grant. Is there any questions on that slide? This is just the same information, but for those that like pictures and graphs, a little bit of what it looks like between the elementary in the dark blue and the high school in the light gray. I'm just going to drill into 2 of the budgeted funds just to kind of give you an idea as to what the spending looks like. I chose adult education, and that's mostly because adult education over the past 10 years has changed drastically from what it used to look like to what it looks like now, and I thought it would be interesting for you guys to see where the dollars actually go. Grow your own teacher, that's the new item in this list this year. That's the $25,000 to pay for staff and future employees to receive the education necessary to obtain teaching licenses. Thrive is another big part of that. A couple years ago, we moved that cost out of the general fund into adult education to pay for our parent liaisons that work directly with parents from kids that go to our schools. The salary and benefits are remaining the same. The salary goes to pay for Berdine and her staff in the adult education office. Another big part of that is the Megan Roth piece and the Bozeman Reads and her community outreach that goes along with that. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overall idea of what that breakdown looks like now, since we don't have as many true adult education programs as we once did. Thought that might be interesting. And then the only other budgeted fund that I just want to give you a breakdown, because it's a really exciting part of what this upcoming year entails, is the flexibility fund. So the flexibility fund, we receive a very small amount for transformational learning that we typically use to offset one of the BCA teachers' salaries to some degree. That's just given to us from the state each year. The 2 bottom lines on here, the Advanced Opportunity Act, are the grant that we received that is going to allow us to further our CED classes and programs. It's allowing us to hire an actual person to oversee and implement that program. So it's a lot more dollars coming in and a lot less expenses that families are going to have to pay to allow their children to take part in some of those classes. So I thought that was really cool and a great thing that came from the year. So now moving into the general fund, like I spoke to a few minutes ago, the inflationary increases are all based on legislative session. It was 2.7% for fiscal year '24. It was maxed out at 3% for fiscal year '25. It's anticipated that this upcoming legislative session, they'll approve the same max increase for fiscal year '26 and '27. We all know that there's going to be a lot more discussions regarding school districts and budgets in this upcoming legislative session, but for the time being, that's what we are anticipating there. So this is just a 5-year history of the general fund. The average increase that we've seen overall is right about 3.38%. So that's slightly above inflation, mostly due to the high school increases in enrollment. The total budget, this is broken out between elementary and high school, but the total budget anticipated for fiscal year '25 is going to be $62,287,943. So it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to be fiscally responsible for and to be transparent to our taxpayers to ensure that they understand what we're using it for and what quality education we're providing to the kids. This is a slide that should be familiar to all of you. This is our structural imbalance slide. And during the budget committee discussions a couple years ago, this was a slide that kept popping up over and over again. What I think is really important to see in this slide is the difference between the elementary and the high school. As you can see, our elementary is the red line. We were able to decrease the structural imbalance in fiscal year '24. However, when we're looking ahead to fiscal year '25, you see that line going back down. That's a really big deal. There's a lot of things that play into that. Some of the major downturn issues are increases in subcosts. We've been able to staff our classrooms, which is really important, but there is a cost associated with that. And that has been an increase year over year. Our pay increases for this upcoming year, it's 2% for certified, 5% for classified. That's adding to that downturn. We have had Title I funds are starting to run out. We were previously coding a lot of our ML/EL staff into Title I. However, because the Title I funds are being used to pay for staffing increases for some of those other programs, we don't have as much money to allocate to ML/EL staff in those funds, so those are being moved to the general fund. Bozeman Reeds, we're hiring 2 new positions. Obviously, we're going to have the A and B for that, but that's a year delayed. And then our enrollment stagnation. So the elementary, without seeing the growths as it has in the past, we're really starting to feel the effects of that. So I want that to be a big red line, and I want that to be in the back of everybody's minds as we go into the following or the upcoming year and start looking at what we can do to mitigate that legislatively and internally. So in fiscal year '24, our elementary deficit was $3.1 million. We're looking at a fiscal year '25 estimate of $3.4 million. High school is a little bit of a different story. You can see the green line there with the budget committee. We made a lot of really good waves there to get them closer to that $0 line. We're looking at fiscal year '24, the deficit was right around $600,000. For fiscal year '25, we're looking at a deficit of $270,000. So we are crawling out of the bucket on that one. Any questions about that? So this is something new that we're bringing to you, and I want to preface this with there is a difference between actual spending and budgeted spending. So when we set a budget based on filling every single open position in the district. We base the budget on really cold winters, as Mike has alluded to in the past. The budget is what we can spend up to. It's not necessarily what we do spend up to. So what we're showing here today is just some examples of budget to actual and vacancy savings. This is looking at a comparison within our classified union. The blue is going to be custodian, the orange is the secretary, and the gray is para budget. And what you can see here is the dark black line is if we were to fill every position at 100%. We did not have any open positions listed on our website. Every para position, every secretary position, every custodial position within the schools is filled. That would be what we budget for. The lines down below show a bit of a different story. And you'll see it starts with fiscal year 18 and goes up to fiscal year 25, which we obviously don't know necessarily what that's going to look like. But fiscal year 20 is where everything changes. Prior to fiscal year 20, we were staying right in line with what we were budgeting and what we were filling. However, the pandemic changed everything, and it changed it not just for that year, it changed it into the future that we're living now. As you can see, we are having trends that have been going down, specifically in the para department. We're only staffing currently about 56% of our positions for paras across the board, 86% for custodians. Secretaries are always a little bit easier to fill. It's not quite as many positions that are ever open for secretaries, but you can see that trend from pandemic forward. And that's where the recruitment and retention and how can we keep quality employees and how can we attract quality employees into our district. And this is becoming good when it comes to looking at bottom line numbers, but it's definitely a challenge when it gets to classrooms and to schools and to maintaining the day-to-day efficiencies. Here is the same information, just instead of in percentages, it's in actual dollar amounts. So you can see prior to fiscal year 21, our budget and our actual numbers were staying really, really close. The pandemic happened, and now you can see even in the high school, which is the orange, the amount of money that we're saving for not filling positions each year continues to be a lot larger than it was in the past. So ultimately, at the end of the year, those dollars saved do affect our structural imbalance. That makes the lines go up more. However, when we look at classrooms, when we look at recruitment and retention, it has, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. So here is what the lines look like. So budget is blue, actual is orange. You can see once again, everything was staying pretty consistent. The lines were staying the same amount apart each year, which is what we want to see. Pandemic occurred, and then you can see how things have started to change. And there's a few explanations for what these mean. So first, it's the planned decrease. So we've seen in that structural imbalance time and time again, that initial drop. That initial drop was planned. That was for the opening of GHS. We knew that the efficiencies of having all the kids in one building were not going to be there. So we knew that that decrease was coming. The increase that you see here was when we received all of the one-time funds from the government for COVID. So that's our ESSER funding, and that's why you see it go back up a little. We were able to use that funding to cover some of the costs our general fund typically would have. And then the ESSER cliff. So with the ESSER money, it was great to get, but it also implemented a lot of new plans, a lot of new learning techniques that cost money and that we're not necessarily willing to get rid of because it was what was best for students. We are no longer receiving those funds, but it's also important to still continue providing quality education to our kids. So that's what we call the ESSER cliff, and everybody across the state of Montana is feeling the ESSER cliff at this point. Where you can see the actual popped back up is based on the budget reductions. So we did a lot of hard work to get there. This line is going back up because our vacancy to savings, we're saving money on those positions that are not being filled. And we also cut FTE in the K-8 district, and we've gone through the whole rigmarole of balancing that $4.1 million deficit. So when we look to the future, our budget is staying pretty consistent for the upcoming year. There's no big changes on the horizon. So once we start filling out and finishing year-end books, we'll have a bit better idea of what that looks like for the end of last year going into this year.
Is there something in by law or that we have to have that gap between our budget and actual? Like I saw it's pretty close, but is there anything that says like?
In state law, there's nothing that speaks to budget to actual. This is just, when Mike and I set budgets, a lot of times it's looking at lines. It's looking at historically what the trends have been and what do we anticipate them to be. And so a lot of times we're just trying to make the lines mirror each other, touch, but when they get off like this, that's a lot of money. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that the budget is different than the actual and what can we do to get those lines back to being closer together. An example of it was the vacancy savings that we do have without those filled positions. If those positions had all been filled, that orange line would be closer to the blue line. But there's nothing in law that dictates what our budget should be compared to what our actual spend is. I mean, you can't spend over your budget, but does that make sense?
Just a reminder to please use your microphone.
Sorry.
Thanks, that's right.
You all heard my question though.
They didn't hear it. You can repeat it.
My question was, is there something in state law that we have to have that those two lines be separated by a certain amount or a certain percentage? Like, and she said no.
Okay, so for the final part, and this is always the hardest part to present this time of year because I don't have any real numbers to give you guys, is our tax outlook. So we will receive taxable value the first Monday in August. So that's next Monday. So once that happens, we'll start plugging a lot of numbers into a lot of spreadsheets to get actual numbers to provide to you at the August board meeting. So for the time being, we're doing estimates and we're doing a little bit of guessing on our end, for lack of a better term. What this graph shows right here is it shows what our taxable value reappraisals have looked like in the past. So as you know, we get tax reappraisals every other year. Last year was obviously a bigger hit than I think anybody anticipated. Typically on non-reappraisal years, we look at roughly a 2% increase just because of tax base growth, the construction around the area. And typically on reappraisal years, we estimate 7% increase. So that stayed pretty in line for a long time, up until last year when the 54 and 56% taxable value increases kind of blew everything out of the water. This year, when we've been running numbers based on a 0% increase. So we've been using the taxable value that we all received last year to project our numbers for next year. One of the reasons we did that, even though we do see continued growth in the area, is a lot of people were shell-shocked by that number, and so a lot of protested taxes have been happening throughout the community. And we don't really know exactly what that number looks like. So for all of the projections we've used so far, it's based on 0%. We'll get the true numbers next week when they release the taxable value.
Sorry, Lacey,
No, you're
is
good.
that the two different colors, city and county, or elementary district, high school
Yeah,
district?
shoot, sorry. Yes,
That's
it's
all right.
elementary's blue, high school's the beige. Yeah, sorry, I didn't have that on there. And it's all Bozeman School District.
Thank you.
So this is just a slide that shows the taxes per $100,000 for an assessed value in a home. You can see on here where the reappraisal years stand. When it levels out, fiscal year 20 was a reappraisal year. It leveled out for a couple years. It dropped again for fiscal year 22, And then when we had the reappraisal year in fiscal year '24, it dropped again. The reason these numbers are dropping is because the tax base is growing so much, and each mill is worth more. So the majority of our taxes that we levy are based on flat dollar amounts, not mills. And so that is the biggest differentiation between us and other different government entities, is we don't get to necessarily levy 10 mills, we have to levy $100,000. And so as the tax base grows, that $100,000 gets spread out among more people. So when we're looking at the tax outlook, what I am seeing in our budgeted funds for potential increases is the general fund, as we know. We had levies that were approved by our taxpayers. So there's potential increases there. Transportation, especially with this new per route rate, that will likely increase the amount we have to levy there. And then as well as building reserve. So I said that most of our levies are based on flat dollar amounts. As we know, our safety levies in our elementary and high school districts are each based on mills. So as taxable value increases, the amount of revenue increases because we levy it by mill rather than flat dollar amount. The big unknown at this point is taxable value. It's really hard to be able to tell you what our ultimate taxes will look like for the upcoming year without having that. There's a lot of speculation I could give you. Our ultimate goal is to be fiscally responsible with our taxpayer dollars and try and hold it as neutral as possible. We don't want to give them any big increase. We want to keep it stable. We want to fund our programs fully, but we also understand that we need to be cognizant of what they see on their tax bills each year as well. So overall, there's no large changes anticipated for this upcoming year. We have some increases in budgets, but it's not going to be anything major. The uncertainties that go into the budget, that go into the actual numbers, are our position fill rates. What we don't fill affects our overall bottom line. The taxable value is going to have a big impact as to what we levy. And then obviously we're still working on closing out our year end. That'll be all wrapped up and done by that August 19th meeting. So we'll be able to give some better information there. Casey?
Quick question, Lacey. In a couple of weeks, you'll have taxable values, which will clear up some of this, but how do the protested taxes fit into your final calculations?
So ultimately, it depends. The protested taxes are money that we are not receiving when we receive the tax payments each month. Historically speaking, we've had a tax receipt rate of like 98%. There has been more protested taxes that I see on the reports that we don't get to count towards revenue than ever before. I'm hoping that we're just being conservative with the 0% estimate. I hope that we don't see any sort of influx because of that, but it just is something we have to take into consideration. I know that Mike had reached out to the Montana Department of Revenue to kind of try and get a solid number on that, and they weren't able to provide that. They just knew it was high.
Thank you, Lacey, for all the work. I can just add to, I know we went through quite a few appeals as well within our office on different projects. Most of our properties are commercial. Residential, just looking at and doing comparisons, I don't see that there's a huge change in those potentially, but commercial is an area that I would say that there was probably a significant amount of information. Since we're in a non-disclosure state, the state doesn't have access to leases and sales and that sort of thing unless you provide it to them. From what we saw in our office, the most significant area of appeals being approved more was in the commercial area property. And I think you at 0%, or the district at 0% is will probably work out, as Mike mentioned, I think, and pointed to the building across the street. Obviously, that goes into next year, and there's quite a few of those projects going on that are large. So I think between the commercial stuff that we saw, and then but all the new stuff that's coming on, it seemed the 0% makes sense to me. So just to add an outside perspective to that conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. And the final thing I want to wrap up with this, the budget presentation for me is a little bit of a challenge because I could go down any wormhole you want me to. So my final item on here is just expectations and valued input. What do you guys want to see? What's important for you to make decisions? What are some things that are of interest for you for the upcoming August 19th meeting that will help you have a better idea of the overall picture, or if there's individual funds you want more information on? I'd love to be able to come back with information that is pertinent to what you're thinking about and what can help you guys.
I heard you say the incoming kindergarten class is the smallest since 2010.
Yes, this year's class.
Oh, the one that we
This
just
year's
got done with.
kindergarten class.
Yeah, and
Or-
we won't have enrollment numbers till October for this incoming year.
Correct.
Do we have any indication or feel for what that might look like?
Yep, so we do have projections and we use the birth rates from the hospital to make a lot of those projections. I could certainly bring, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. We're anticipating it to be another small class, but I can certainly bring what those look like to the next meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know that I need you to do extra work in addition to what we already do with enrollment projections. I was just curious
No.
if we had any information.
We do, it's no extra
Yeah.
work. I just need to pull it out of the spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Lacey and Mike, for this information. My perspective on this is that you guys have always presented us a very firm, reliable budget. So I trust what you tell us in these, and I think the presentations you give are very good. The graphs and all the information are very helpful and very good. And I mean, you know better than I do, we really don't know the final results until after we get the taxable value stuff, so after next week. So, but I appreciate all the work you guys do and trust the information you give us. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Trustee Neal, to your question, these aren't the actual OPI counts, but we maintain a K-5 enrollment spreadsheet. Ended the year 23-24 with around 462 kindergarten students and currently have 438 enrolled. So we are down from last year. We certainly get August enrollments, but I don't anticipate it going over 462.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to say thank you for all of this, and we can't even understand everything that you do, but we know you do a lot, and I think your presentation, to answer your question, does a great job of giving us the information we need to be accountable to our taxpayers, while not bringing us into the weeds too much. So thank you. After every one of your presentations, feel like I have a great idea of the general analysis of all you do. And I just appreciate your work because I know it's a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And HR isn't here, but I was wondering, you know, the position fill rates, they fluctuate. I mean, what's that looked like this past year or the last, since 2020?
I can speak to that a little bit
I
in
guess I'm
general.
talking within the year, not, yeah.
We've done a great job of filling all certified positions with the exception of teacher of deaf and hard of hearing and world language at the middle school. Those remain challenging areas. Pat Strauss is sick today, that's why he's not here. He, at a previous board meeting, said we were anticipating the largest special ed vacancy that we had seen ever. We had, in spring, had up to 17 positions for 24-25 that were open. We have filled almost all of those. The vast majority of the Grow Your Own teacher dollars that the board allocated are being used to fill those special education positions. So we have mentioned previously we have some paraprofessionals who have bachelor's degrees that are high quality that we're putting through the ABC Teach program. We have some paraprofessionals that are don't have a bachelor's degree that we are supporting them getting their bachelor's degree in some online programs. And then we have some community members with bachelor's degrees in a variety of areas that we're putting through ABC Teach to fill those positions. So I think almost all of those dollars are going to that special education niche. We still have a handful of openings around the district, but feel pretty good about certified teaching positions. I would anticipate that the secretary, the para, and the custodial will be in the same boat with vacancy savings and unfilled positions.
Superintendent Bertram, thank you. I think that's all the same thing. One for Lacey, I guess. You got it back there already?
Yeah. Getting the technology set up. So item 5.4 has 3 parts. We're going to talk about some boundaries. First, high school boundaries, then K-8 boundaries. I'll let you know up front, trustees, on those 2 items, looking for some, we're going to do some consensus work. And I'm going to give you some thought-provoking questions tied to those, and I have a superintendent recommendation on all of those, on 2 of those. No board action, just want to take the pulse of where the board is at on those topics. Then when we move to the 3rd item, school district organization, no superintendent recommendation there. It's more just a presentation and information. Because these meetings are now video and audio recorded, I'll be presenting on the recording. When we go to your tables and table talk, don't turn on your microphones. We're not trying to capture all of those conversations all at once, so you'll just have a regular discussion. If we do any reporting out on what we heard from your tables, have that person get on the microphone so we can capture that audio. What you have in front of you is a note-taking sheet. Instead of using a whole bunch of note cards, we put all the questions front and back. There's a lot of questions there. We may not get to all of them related to these topics. The important part is that Mr. Waterman and I are going to tag team some of these. We're going to give you some information, but want to spend most of the time allowing you to discuss these topics. Okay. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead to the next one. So the first conversations is around high school boundaries. What you see there is enrollment history and functional capacity. So the black line being functional capacity, the 3 years of enrollment at Bozeman High School and Gallatin High School. We have communicated, I believe it was the end of the 22-23 school year. Sometime during that year, we capped enrollment at Gallatin High School as they bumped up to that 1,500 student enrollment. These are the official, I believe, the official OPI enrollment counts, so they're a little less, but functionally, we were since mid-22-23, we've been full at Gallatin High School, which means if you buy a house across the street from Gallatin High School and you have a high school student, we're enrolling those students at Bozeman High. We are going to jump, any questions on the graph? You see that we have, with the remodel that happened at Bozeman High School, we have quite a bit of capacity there. Without doing Phase 2 at Gallatin High School, we have no capacity for growth there. I think it's also showing up in parking. If you've tried to park at Gallatin High during an event or during a school day, we have kids and teachers, staff spilling out into the neighborhoods for parking. Go ahead to the next slide. Get you talking. At your tables, 3 questions, I'll talk through them all. What are the worst possible outcomes of addressing the discrepancy in high school enrollment? So what I'm getting at here is convening a boundaries discussion at the high school level. So what are the worst possible outcomes of addressing that? What are the best possible outcomes of addressing that? And then what should be considered for district administration if we were to design a process to address high school boundary discrepancies? You can work through those one at a time. You can take a stab at all of them. I would recommend in consensus format, you take a little time to think and write, and then start discussing at your tables.